Hi and welcome back to the intermediate and advanced shading techniques for the Humphrey Bogart eye portrait. Today we're going to be looking at how a lot of the advanced and intermediate techniques are done on a portrait. Basically all we're going to be introducing is texture, and it's done in a very similar fashion to what we were doing yesterday with the basic kind of black. We want to introduce texture, and I use two different methods: a stippling method, which you've already seen, and a method you could probably relate to a big spaghetti thread, if that makes sense. It's just a continuous line that's very tight, that weaves in and out of each of itself, and it's a process that's really good for bringing out pores in skin and such. I'm going to go in with white first, because yesterday we touched up a little bit of the white that was originally there from the black. I want to reintroduce a little bit of that white, and again, because I've gone over it slightly with the black, it's going to give me a nice, interesting, more intense contrast. I'm going to go through and do all the white highlights again in the whole portrait. Then I'm going to do a little bit of spaghetti stroke in the white areas themselves. The spaghetti stroke will then start turning into more of a stippling stroke as it goes into the lighter grey areas. I don't want to cover too much of my light grey with the white. I'll zoom in a little bit, start on the nose where the stippling is going to be quite intense, and hopefully you'll be able to see the action. And so what I'm going to do is a little bit of a spaghetti style stroke, which is just, as I said, a continuous line. That's working a bit better for me. I'm going to go up into the nose area. That's probably from around about a centimetre away. Being white as white is, you'll have the occasional blowout, but again, all this will be covered later. So, as with our earlier layers, you don't really have to worry too much about mistakes. Up around the bridge of the nose, as with the earlier layers, we have white lines coming around, going back into the eye area. We put a little bit of black there on our basic layers. You'll find that when the white goes back over, we still want to see some of that black coming through. So in this area I'm going to use more of a stippling action with the white, blending into that grey a little bit, and then I can intensify it back to squiggly lines for the bridge of the nose. These highlights here, I'm putting in near as pure lines, pure white lines. And try to match your reference. And again, it doesn't matter if we run into these dark areas, because again, we are going to be going over this black later, because by the time we put a lot of the white and the light grey back in, we'll definitely need to touch up the black, and again, that's the last process of the advanced picker. I'm going to work into that line a little bit with a little bit more of a spaghetti style stroke. And again, if I go into any light grey area of the nose, I just want to pull out a little bit and just do a bit more of a stippling dot action, because I still want a little bit of that grey to be coming through. Down in the nose here, you'll see that there's more lines. I'm going to rotate my board over, use the edge of my finger again to introduce those lines. Now, they don't have to be perfect. Just come in a little bit more there so you can see. There's two little white lines that I've done there. Now, a little bit more of that spaghetti stroke, but just to the point where I can still see that line, and I'll blend it into the main highlight. Come out a little bit now, I'm working into light grey again. And again, I'm just doing little dots here and there that will eventually just be a little highlight poking through, a little pore. The same process is pretty much done up around the eyes, around the eyelids, in the eyeballs themselves, up in the forehead. Once you start seeing the process and understanding how I'm actually achieving it, I won't have to tell you as much about it. You'll pretty much figure out what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I'm just going to turn my portrait over here a little bit, because I want to cut back in this edge. And again, I'm already got a little bit of a white highlight there, so I'm going to just stipple right along that edge there. I could use a stencil here, but again, I can cut that black in later, so any major stippling that I do, I try to fog over a little bit just so it hides a little bit of the stippling, but don't fog over it too much because then you lose all the detail from that stippling. As you can see, I've gone into that dark area a little bit, but later on we'll cut that in with the stencil and we'll stipple the black back out. But for the time being, I'm just going to do a little bit more white detail through here, a little bit more stippling. And again, I'm probably around about 2 centimeters distance. I'm moving pretty quickly so the white doesn't build up too much and cover too much of my grey. The reason I pulse my gun is because every now and then it skips that grey, which is the exact effect that we're looking for. You can see now, I'm sure, how it's starting to bring up the detail in the white. Just zoom it out a little bit. And we'll start doing a little bit more work just up in that area. You'll notice in the reference that it's more light in this area here. There's a bit of a darker edge going to it, so I'm going to intensify the white in around this centre area. And then it's a bit of a spaghetti stroke. I've got constant paint coming through. I'm just moving really quickly. There's a little bit of a wiggly action to my hand. Now working back in this area, I'm going to come out a little bit and just do slightly larger dots. There's another line, white line going across there from the reference. I'll put him in. There's a few others there, but they're a little bit lighter. You see how those lines are there, you blend them in, just with a little bit more of that stippling spaghetti stroke. And sometimes I'll just go along the line a little bit with that same kind of action. We could probably put our really bright highlight back in this corner of the eye. Then I'm just going to do a little bit of minor stippling there. Lifting out as I go away from that highlight. There's still a fair bit of work to be done in this area, starting to blend this white highlight back into the eye area. Again, if you have a close look at the reference there, it is reasonably light coming through this area, and there's a lot of lines, little lines going on in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a lot of little white dagger strokes in there. Just make them reasonably random, coming back into that nose area, and slowly build them up. Don't make them too intense with the white straight away. And then following the reference, this area down here is a little bit lighter, so I can afford to do some decent line work down there. And then I'm going to start going back to a stippling action underneath into this highlight. Adding the other little white dot into that black. In the reference, there's quite a few intense little white dots coming along under the bottom of the eye and coming up into that eyelid. I'll just turn him over a little bit so I can do this part nice and easy. Right, but what I want to do is I want to start introducing a little bit of this white up into that shadow. Because we still had some lighter lines there earlier on where we did the black in between, it's actually quite easy to get the light back into it, and it doesn't colour shift it too bad. So you can see it's just started to introduce a little bit of a texture into this area. Now I'm going to do a little bit more of that texture through here, which was the short little lines. Every now and then make a fat one, make a thin one, not a fat one. And we're working down into this area here. I can see there's quite a bright one around about there in the reference. And now I'm going to stipple a little bit of this darker grey away and blend it into that highlight on the bridge of the nose. Shooting from around about 2 centimetres there with that stippling. And then just pulsing the gun. Follow along the lines a little bit, but let a little bit of that black still come through. The more detail we put into this white layer, basically the more detail the picture will have at the end. So don't be afraid to put some nice little lines in here and there, but again allow some of that original grey, black, like it did earlier, to poke through. Just a little bit of the spaghetti straight down in there. I'm not doing it as close as I did to what I did the nose. The reason being because it's not quite as close to the camera. I'm just going to blend that off by twisting away with my airbrush into a more stippling action here. You can see I'm starting to get the contrast, and I'm starting to get the skin kind of look going on. There's still a lot more work to go. This highlight needs to be brought down on the nose, and the highlights need to be introduced into here. There's also little hairs that you can see just on the side of the nose. So we could do really, really short, small dagger strokes there, or I could use the edge of my thumb to produce those. Nice and close, because it's quite close. See the little dots start forming those highlights. I'll do a little bit on those hair follicles on the nose. And then I'm just going to do it with just with the edge of my finger. You could use a stencil for that type of work, just the edge of the stencil. I find it easy just using my finger. Now I'm just going to soften that back a bit and introduce a little bit more of that highlight stippling down around the bottom. You can see I'm still letting a lot of my earlier grey come through. We need to fill in a little bit of this part of the nose. Just continuing with the stippling a little bit up around the nose area. You find the light fogging of the white actually starts changing those earlier greys a little bit too. It starts lightening them down because the white I'm using is very thin. Couple more little lines there, and then we'll just blend them in a bit. A bit more of a spaghetti stroke there, a bit faster moving. Right, and I'm also going to do a little bit in around here. And a bit more of a stippling action this time, so I can leave the patches of that early grey. A little bit into that shadow there, and again we've probably got some lines we can introduce here. And I'm just going to blend those lines a little bit off a little bit. Right, a little bit more work in there, and a little bit more stippling, and up through here. I'm working from probably a centimetre to 2 centimetres distance. When I'm working on the nose or any features that need to be kind of really stand out, I'll work a lot closer. If it's closer to the camera, if it's further from the camera, I'll generally work from a bit more distance. I'm going to put a little bit of white up into the eye here. The eye's been neglected a bit now that I'm working on the nose there, so I'll jump back up to what these tutorials are about and do a little bit of a highlight. Again, follow your reference very carefully. I'm just widening up. There's a few patches in the eye here I can widen up. Again, any overspray or anything like that ain't a big problem because we do have to come back in later with the black. You can see I've just put that little white dot that you see in the reference there. Now what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to fog back this whole eyeball again. Just very lightly. I don't have to go too far into that top shadow. And a bit of a dirty tip there. Oh, but again, anything up here can be blackened out later. And so you can see just fogging back that eyeballs, giving a little bit more of that wet look that we're actually looking for. We'll come back in with our low greys and darker greys and blacks later, and they'll be the base for the actual eye. Just going to intensify that highlight there a bit. I'm also going to just put a little bit of a light clouding back in the internal ring of the iris area, and my dot in the centre of the eye. I'm sure you can see there that it needs cleaned up a little bit, but that is the basic look that we're trying to achieve for the eye itself. I'll go in a little bit there, hopefully so you can see it in a bit more detail. We're still going to put some highlights in along that edge, but it's just underneath the actual eyelashes, so I'm going to go in between the eyelashes with some dots. It doesn't matter if I cover the eyelash a bit, because we are going to come back in again later and detail them up with some stencil work. I'm just putting those highlights underneath his eye. Now I'll blend them in, just by coming out a little bit more on the airbrush and just softly folding them back. Whilst I'm there, I could bring in a little bit of a highlight to his bottom eyelid. And then I'm just going to sprinkle into that shadow a little bit. Although I'm not going to go crazy on it, I'm going to introduce a little bit of white back in up around the eyebrow there. I'm just putting it in lightly. Later on, it's just going to become a little bit of a highlight, because again, we'll go over it in the blacks. I'm just going to fog that out a little bit so they're not too intense. And just a little bit of a line on the gun through the centre. And I'm just trying to pick little highlights from the references that I can make in. Over on this side of the face, just underneath the eye there, you'll see that there's, in the reference, a lot of details going in, similar to these lines over in the nose area. So I can go over and just... Alright, you see I put the lines in there, they stand out quite a fair bit, but what we're going to do now is blend them in a little bit with some of that tight spaghetti / stippling work. Not going into that shadow too far, but if you do, again, it can be covered up later. Coming out a little bit with my airbrush, still carrying on that stippling action. And on the cheek area around here, I'm going to come out a little bit, probably around about 3 centimetres away, and I'm going to blend that back in. Just able to see the occasional There's a white dot in there. Contrast against the black quite nicely. You can see now those lines are nearly disappeared. Through here we've got lots of little tight lines going on. There's similar little dagger strokes to what I was doing up in the yard there, and these will continue up into that eye area a little bit. Bit of stippling now just to blend it all in. So don't cover too many of those nice lines that you just did. You find that those lines themselves will help come through the painting later. Same thing through here. A lot of lines, a lot of little dots. You can see them all in the reference. Slow down, have a really close look at the reference, and pick out every little dot if you have to. One there, one there. Right now I'm just going to go in a bit more of a random action. But there's a bit of a line of them over on this side. And then just continuing a bit of the work right in the middle here. Light's been a bit fun to spray with today. It is quite chilly, so it's not behaving nicely to me. I could always send it down a little bit more if it was something that was worrying me, but it's not too worried. Too much of a worry having the odd little bit of spatter. Just intensifying the highlight towards the centre there. A bit more of a spaghetti stroke. The same in this one here. You see I went through and did a bit of a softer shade first, and then I come back into the centres and actually highlighted even more. There's a little bit too much darkness going on there, so I'm just going to soften that down with a little bit of my white. And because the white I'm using is quite transparent, you'll find it just turns into a bit more of a grey again. A bit of a lighter grey, which assists us when we actually go back in a short while and put more light grey. I'm just going to soften a little bit of these shadows. I'm doing this from around about 5 to 6 centimetres away, and basically fogging over the skin. And not going too crazy near really dark edges. I'll pin that a little bit now, so you can see the effect that it's actually starting to pick up. And I'm going to work a little bit into this area, a little bit down into that nose area again underneath his nose, and I'll also just keep continuing to soften down these shadows with a little bit more white highlights in there. I won't go too crazy into these shadows because I do want to add a little bit of grey, light grey shortly. You can just follow your reference and try to pick out all your little dots and all your little lines and any little features that you kind of want coming through the next layer. It's quite intense there, so I'm going to come in nice and close because I don't want to obliterate that line too much. I'm just going to blend that out. Stippling going on to break that shadow up a little bit. That's mainly what I'm doing with the white. I'm just breaking the shadow up a little bit. And down here there's a lot more detail that we can put in, a lot more stippling and some quite intense white dots. Hopefully you can see on the picture now that it is starting to lighten up again a fair bit, and by introducing some of these white highlights, we're kind of bringing some nice life back into the painting. And rather than looking flat and two-dimensional like the first four layers did, this starts actually bring some kind of dimension and shape into all your shadows. And I'm just picking out little features and details that I can see in my reference that I didn't put in earlier. I'll blend this area in here a little bit better. Just a little bit down the bottom there, even though it's not really the focus. Around here, because it's a little bit closer to the camera on the ridge and a little bit further away, what I do is I start close and then come away a little bit quickly. And into that shadow a bit. Starting to get quite spitty on the airbrush there. Time for a clean. I'm just going to pull back on the camera a little bit so you can see a little bit of the effect that we're starting to create with the white going in. I've still got a lot more to go in over here, a lot more to go in around the eyes, a little bit into this eye itself, and a little bit up in the forehead there. I'll do a little bit of the forehead work now. Again, it's just a spitballing type action. See in the forehead, you won't see the pores as individually, but they are still there. So what I'm going to do is just a little bit larger work in the way of my dots. And again, just being random with them. Maybe a little bit over here. And I can definitely see I need a fair bit coming through there. Also on that one, which again is more like a line. And you just blend away from it a little bit. We'll get into some more detail work around the eyes themselves. If you have a look at a lot of lines, you'll find there'll be a white continuation of a black line. If you can see how I've kind of curled this black line into a white line that then comes back this way, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. So it's around here that I'm talking about. I'm just starting to introduce a few white lines going up into that area under his eye. And a few of them I'll just towards the end there turn into little dots right in the centre. A little bit of a white highlight under the eye there. And there's quite intense white dots right in the corner there. Whilst I'm here, I'll do a little bit of white work back into the eye there. Just soften that shadow down a bit. But again, I will come back later on and reintroduce that shadow. It's layer upon layer upon layer that achieves that real deep three-dimensional look. A little bit of detail work around here. I'm going to be nice and close because you can see on the reference there that quite a fair bit of it stands out. Again, remember there's always a top and a bottom to most features. If you spray highlights in the bottom where there should be shadow, it isn't going to look right. There's the odd little bit of whiteness in here because it is a bit more darker side of the face, so we don't need to go quite as intense with the white as what we did on the other side. And I'm going to do it from a little bit more distance, because if you think about it, that side of the face is going to be further away from the camera. Re-establish a little bit of that whiteness into his cheek, which I could bring down a little bit further if I so desired enough, a little bit towards this highlighted area at the top. This is what I'll do next. Just a bit of a wiggly action. You can see my whites spraying out the eye, a bit of a spatter. The fact is that the spatter isn't really a huge concern of mine at the moment. You find that anything that has got a little bit of spatter, it can be covered up quite easily later on with just that little bit of extra black. It is quite cold at the moment where I am painting in my outside studio, so it's very hard for me to control not getting any spatter at all. So again, I'm just pulling out little highlights in the cheeks here and there, just the odd dot. And if I want to work into this darker area a little bit, I'm just going to do my dots from a little bit further away and still allow a little bit of that black to come through. Zoom out a little bit. You can see straight away the effect that those highlights are starting to have, and we can keep working them and working them and working them until we're happy that they're visually representative of the portrait itself. I'm even going to pull them out a little bit heavier. And there's also some up on the eyelid there, and just underneath the eye there that I've got to get in. And you find along the edge of the eye there, there's quite a strong highlight. I'm going to put him in. And that highlight does curve around that feature of his eye a little bit. And if you also notice, there's funny little lines going into the shadow. Now what I'll do is I'll just fill that line in freehand just a little bit, soften it. So bear in mind later we're putting black back in there, so that's when we can really start bringing the features back out again. A fair bit of white needs to go in on the top of the eyelid over the other side here. So I'll just come across a little bit and zoom in a little bit. I'm just going to start doing this little line in here, and all I'm going to do is basically align just right in that top edge, and every now and then I'm just going to stop and do a little dot or a big dot, make a little bit of a line. So I've just put my little line in there with a few little dots. Cut another couple of little lines underneath the eye there in the shadow. Again, this is going to be reshadowed, but some features you still want coming through your shadow. And now it's just a case of kind of intensifying anything that you don't think quite looks right according to the reference, and soften down a few of these shadows a little bit. Whilst I'm here, I've got the camera there, I'm just going to cut a little bit of this edging. I'm just going to do the freehand line there. And then blend it in just slightly into that shaded area. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see what I just did. So it's just brought the highlight into that side of his face there. Later on, again, we will be working our blacks back in, so any overspray will be taken care of. I'm just going to put some horizontal type of lines along the top of the eye there. Then just introducing some of those lines into from his forehead. And I'll also just do a little bit of a light line on the actual wrinkle itself. Now just softly blend all that off, just with a little bit of white overspray. I still would like to put a few more intense white areas in around here, probably around his nose and a few little white dots around here. Also just a little bit of extra work on his cheek over on the other side there. These are done from probably about 2 centimetres away, and then just moving quickly in and around all that dark shading I did earlier, and bring a few down into the extra dark shading as well. I've finished a lot of the white highlights that I wanted to do. I'm just going to adjust the brightness for a little bit because what you're seeing on the monitor probably isn't quite what I'm seeing here. So I'll just adjust the brightness up a little bit, because that's actually pretty much the closest look I can get to what I'm seeing in front of me. You can see all the white details starting to form and starting to create nice detail in the lower layers of the face. But you can actually continue with it and continue with it and continue with it until you spend hours upon hours upon hours actually just putting this kind of detail in. It depends on how far you want to push a portrait. If you're just looking for a bit of a realistic look, that's probably as far as we really need to go with the white currently. There's just a little bit of a highlight I need to do around the eyelids on the other side there, which I'll turn upside down for. So similar to what I did on the other side, just a bit of a line with a couple of dots in it. So that's where I'm going to leave this white layer for the time being. We're still going to come back in with a light grey layer. That will be the next section. It actually helps starting to create a little bit more detail, and it helps soften down a little bit of the white that we just put in. You could go in and fog back a fair bit of that white that we've just put in. You will lose a lot of the effect from your earlier greys coming through if you do too much fogging. Later on, you'll see the entire effect come together. It will look a little bit messy until we start putting our true blacks back in. So I'm starting off with some of my original base colour from layer 1, light grey, and I'm just going to start working into some of my darker grey areas, and also highlight and define my white areas. I do a stippling and spaghetti stroke action, again similar to what we did with the white, but move in and out in between the white so we don't actually affect too much of our original shading there, or our original highlights. But what we do want to do is tone down some of these darker greys that we'll put on in the second layer. So I'll just start doing that, and I shouldn't need to talk for a little while. You should just see me working the nose area. I'll do a fair bit on the nose area, and then we'll jump up to the eyes and do both eyes at the same time. I'm working from about 1 centimetre away and trying to move around pretty quickly. Again, try to avoid some of those white areas. You can see I'm starting to try to form definite dots. And again, what we're basically doing is putting highlights back into the picture. So work into the white, but as you work into the white, lift away a little bit, and as you work into the dark grey, you can lift away a bit as well. You'll find where we've actually put dark grey from our second layer, and even the black that floated over on our third layer, we can cut back in that with our light grey, and they'll start creating highlights similar to our white highlights, but they just won't be quite as obvious. So I'm going to start in the corner of the eye. You see I had a little bit of a excess paint come out then, not a drama, because I can just stipple and blend that back in. Later on, some dark will get introduced back in there, so any little mistakes at this stage can be fixed. If you are finding you're getting too much wet paint coming out, you can always mix a little bit of white back into it, because a little bit of the thinners may evaporate it off. Work a little bit more features back into this dark area that we did. Again, look at your reference, and you'll see there's just the indication of little lines in there. I'm going to continue them down till they meet the white lines. just slightly going under the white line there. Again, think about the contours of the face and try to follow the same type of lines. I'm going to do a little bit of stippling in there just to blend it. And this layer, if you've still got grey red poking through, is probably where you want to try to cover a little bit of it up. In this area I'm going to do a little bit larger stippling and soften that black down a little bit. I don't want to go too dark to the point where I start losing that little bit of white that's still just poking through from that previous layer we just did. Soften a little bit of this area down. Also I can soften the nose down with a little bit more larger general stippling, but as I come around into these highlights, I'll start getting a little bit closer with the more spaghetti strokes. Let a little bit of that black still come through. I'm doing little dots from probably around about 2 to 3 centimeters away. Again, as I move into the nose area a little bit, I'm going to tighten that stroke up, probably about 1 centimeter. And then as I get closer to the centre of the nose, I'm going to go even closer. Just pulsing the gun. And just breaking down the edge of that white highlight a little bit, blending it back in into a little bit of that darker grey work. You can see that quite intense spaghetti stroke there really starts standing out now, but it's still allowing some of that original black from the previous layer and some of the white as well to come through. So what we're mainly looking at doing with this light grey is breaking down a little bit of this really dark, intense blacks, breaking up a little bit of the whites and reintroducing a little bit of a lighter shade between them. Same thing will happen up around the eyes, around the bottom of the eyelids, and what it'll eventually do is it'll really lighten this picture back up again. Again, we're not worried about darks or overspraying darks at the moment. All these darks will go back in as a final layer thing, and that's when a lot of that work gets cleaned up. So what I'll do now is I'll just move around the painting a little bit. I'll start floating in a little bit of colour, a little bit of this light grey back in. I'm fogging a little bit of these areas down a little bit just so it just softens the intensity of it a little bit. And I'll also work a little bit under the eye. I'll save the eyes for last. Working from around about 3 centimeters on the cheek area. Again, the stippling doesn't need to be quite as dominant. And I'm just going to softly break up, as I said, these darker grey areas and the white by kind of picking a line between the two. A little bit bigger now going up into the cheek. And what I'll do is I'll just soften this area down here a little bit. I'll zoom in the camera again so you can get a little bit of appreciation for how this grey's going in. 3 to 4 centimeters away. Now I'm just floating a little bit of that grey back in to the cheek area. And just softening any of those shadows I think that need softened. in accordance to the reference. You see how it starts softening down that original dark tone again. We can do the same through here and start adding a little bit more detail. Again, similar to what we did the other lesson, we're just going to introduce some strokes in there with the light grey. But now I'm going to do it from a little bit closer because I want a little bit more detail to these. Moved it in for a little bit of a tighter shot there, just so you can see those lines starting to form into that black shadow. What it does is it starts softening down the shadow and introducing the highlights that you can see in the actual reference into the shadow itself. Again, just try to follow what you see in the reference. A little bit of a curve to them up on this side of it. Now that I've put that detail in, I'm going to soften the whole area. From about 4 centimeters away, I'm just going over that dark, bit of stippling in there just to break that shadow a little bit into his cheek. And I'll blend it into that cheek colour there a bit. Again, lifting away as I come out to the edge of the canvas. You can see I've gone over there just a little bit. It's still allowing the white lines to come through. You can see there's still a bit of a feature sticking out there with the white. We can get rid of that pretty quickly just by cutting this light grey back in. Again, maybe doing a little bit of line and detail work there. Keep an eye on the reference and just, again, try to put anything that you see in there that might look like a wrinkle, might look like a little white highlight, skin highlight. You can put dots in there. You can see as it goes up into the eye a little bit, they do form a little bit more a dot look. So I'll do that little corner now, and I'll probably just leave that little bit of a section alone and catch some of this up. Drawing these dots from around about 1.5 centimeters away. Being careful not to do anything silly here with my trigger. This paint ain't coming out. Go off your canvas and find out why. Now I've put the detailed dots in. I can move back a little bit into slightly larger dots from a little bit further away, about 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters, and they'll just help blend them back in. And I'm just going to break that shadow up there a little bit as well. And soften that white highlight right in the centre of the eye. And introduce a couple more highlights going up into that shadow there. And again, soften it by pulling it out and floating some of that light grey back in. You should be able to see there that this line down the bottom here is really standing out quite dominantly now. Basically because of the contrast now that I'm putting in with the light grey compared to these really dark colours. So I'm just going to soften that back a little bit, just with probably a very light overspray of that grey. And then I'm just going to stipple into it a little bit with the grey, leaving dots of the darker colour coming through. And I'm just going to soften that corner a little bit and float a little bit of grey back up into there. You can see it's starting to give a little bit of a very textured skin look Now, on the screen there, because you're so close to it, it looks quite dominating. But I'll just go out a little bit on the camera. And now you can see the actual effect of it. Starting to soften down our colours, our greys, back into more of a natural photo tone. Soften a little bit of this nose area. Again, overspray into these dark areas don't really matter at the moment. I'm just going to do a little bit of work in his moustache there. Again, exactly what we did with the previous colours, the white and the black. I'm just going to put some dots in there. And every now and then I'm just going to pull back and put in let a decent dot form. Soften the white one down a bit. And just soften there. You should be able to see that I'm still allowing plenty of that black, a few of the white features, and that still come through. I am going to just soften the entire area down a bit. What we're trying to do here is tonal change a lot of that black back to a grey. And you'll find later on when we put the black back in and let the overspray go over it a little bit, there'll just be so many tonal variations going into the actual shadows and all that. It'll look real. A lot of paintings don't look real because there's no work done in the shadows. They're flat. You've got to put the detail back into the shadow itself. And I'll do that with this light grey layer. Soften and highlight a couple of spots there under the eye. Sometimes I'm just barely floating some paint into it. I'm just going to do a little bit of work up around here, soften this these darks down above the eyebrows a little bit. Here, if I was lazy, I could just go over the whole eyebrow. Again, it adds a little bit of tonal variation, so when we do put black into it later, some of that little highlight work or from that overspray will still come through. But you can shield it off if you need to, or you're a little bit worried about your overspray. Add a little bit of light grey back into the forehead. I was doing that from about 3 to 4 centimetres, and every now and then, again, just dipping through my shaded blacker areas. I'll do the same in the cheek area here, and then probably around about 3 to 4 centimetres. Every now and then, just go a little bit closer and form a dot. Most of the light grey I tend to put in around the white itself. I tend not to go too far into the actual dark greys and blacks. But it's handy to break up the edge of it. Just now floating some colour over that black area to soften it down a bit. And I'm just going to put a little bit of a highlight going through the cheek there. It's just line work. Bit of stippling in there. And again, don't be worried about something like that because we can fix it up a little bit later when we come back in with our darks. I might just do a little bit more detail through here with some stippling and some lines. But I'm going to leave the actual under the eye area where there's a lot of detail going on, until I'm focusing more on the eyes themselves. Although I might just work a little bit more into this area and soften that white down a bit. Now anything that you stipple can stand out a bit, so if you think it's standing out a bit too much, just soften it down with a bit of a light overspray over the top of it. And get some more lines in here while I'm up here. And then you can see the lines stand out quite a fair bit there. But if we just stipple over the top of it, it softens it all back again. The point of it is we could, again, go for hours with our light grey. I'm trying to be a little bit shorter and briefer with the layers. The more realism you want, the more detail you do in each of these layers as you're building back up to your blacks. There is absolutely nothing stopping you being a little bit shorter like I am now, finishing off to your black, and then starting again with your white and going over through the whole process again, layer upon layer upon layer. You can do multiple times and it will only increase the effect of the portrait in the long run. Whether it's needed or not, that's a decision I'll leave up to each one of you guys who are painting it. I'm going to have a little bit of a look back up at these eyes. We'll zoom in a little bit so again you can see hopefully the detail that I'm going to be putting in there. I'll mainly focus on the right eye to begin with. I'll pan across a little bit. There we go. Probably the angle that I'm looking at. We've got some more work to do up in here. There's a lot more little lines and such being introduced. I do want to introduce a little bit of light grey back into my actual eyeball area, and maybe even a little bit just on the inside of my iris there. Whilst over here, I could also soften down a little bit underneath the eyelashes there and the eyelid, and soften these. Should be able to see there I'm not getting a lot of colour shift. Even though I'm going over this black, it's not colour shifting a lot for me, basically because of what I did in the earlier layers. I'm definitely going to put a bit of light grey back in around the bottom of the eyelid there. I'm going to clean it up by doing it quite close, within a centimetre, a nice sharp line going through there. And I'm just going to do some little dots in those little highlight features. These ones are probably about 2 centimetres out. I started a bit closer, and then as I'm kind of coming out, I'm just lifting away the selection. Do a little bit over on the opposite corner there. Exactly the same way I did here, introducing the odd line every now and then add a little bit of stippling over it just to soften the shadow. There's still some white highlights up there, so I don't want to cover them completely. And then I'm going to soften the shadow here a little bit with a bit of stippling. Again, the reference will kind of indicate whether a stippling method will be a better idea. If they're little dots, a stippling method's a good idea, and if you can see little lines there, draw little lines. Darken that down a bit. And I'm just going to work into that white highlight area a little bit with a bigger stippling. And also knock that black there a little bit back. And then blend it off into that big area. Back up into this little section up here. You don't have to be exact with these lines. Again, sometimes it's more about just confusing the eye a little bit to make people believe that they're there. I'm just going to soften into this corner of the shadow a bit, which will also soften the lines there I just did. I'm going to do a little bit of cutting in up here, little dots. If we want to get a little bit fancier, this is where we could start using some French curves or something along those kind of lines, just to cut edges back in. I'll use my little French curve here. So you can now see I can start manipulating this line a little bit if I want to, which I do need to by the reference, because this grey does come down a lot lower, and the black there shouldn't really be there to that extent. So soften it down with the light grey again. This is the kind of process of fixing mistakes on these paintings too. You just go back in with lighter colours, block them back in. Don't try to do it with white, because obviously the white will really stand out. Do it with the grey or something like that. Curves back around, up into that area. And not afraid to put a bit of grey there. And started blending into those lines nicely for me. Same things happening up through here. So I'm just going to bring back a little bit of that skin tone there, and a little bit of light, by adding some whiter hair strokes into the actual eyebrow as well. Obviously I can get a lot finer detail with this gravity airbrush with the tip taken off like that, because I can get quite close to the canvas. There's a couple of other little highlights in there that I can see. I'm just going to break this shadow up a little bit again with my white lines. Put a couple of line highlights down that way. Breaking up with a couple of dots every now and then or something like that. Use a bit of the light grey back into there. Again, now I'm following the reference as close as I can to start matching up where all these lines and that should join up and meet and such. Because if you have a really close look at your reference there, you'll find that there is a lot of detail in there, little light areas coming through, dark areas over the top, and it's just a case of working your lights back and forth and your darks back and forth a little bit until you get a satisfactory result. I'm going to break this area up here a little bit again with some hair strokes. And then just to back off every now and then and soften and blend it back into the actual temple area there with a stippling. And I can just afford to soften that really dark area above the eye, just a fraction with the light grey over the top. I'll just pull out a little bit on the camera there so you can see again the effect that it's starting to create. We're starting to introduce obviously some of our lights back into our eyebrow area, and again if you look really closely at the reference, every now and then one of these eyebrows is picking up a little bit of light. This light greys will colour then go back into your black and start introducing some of those highlights. Oh, I would if I could clean my brush. Again, build it up slowly. You don't want to over highlight it. But anything that you do need to tone down, we can tone down later with the black. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit so you can actually see the small little hair strokes that I was just doing there. So just bring a little bit of detail back into the eyebrow. Also want to put a little bit of light grey through this area. Doing that from quite an angle. And I'm just going to soften into the bottom of the eyebrow. Also soften a little bit of this area. A bit of stippling, whatever you desire. Or just fade the colour in. You can see there's quite a fair bit of contrast going on there now between the grey and the black. Later on we'll be putting black back in over this, so it'll end up breaking this grey back up again. Need to concentrate on just a few little highlights I can see going on down here. And again just soften this shadow down a little bit. So we're stippling and a little bit of floating my paint back in, overspraying it in. Soften down under the eye there a little bit as well. And while we're here, we'll put a little bit of grey back into right in the corner of the eye there, especially up around the top. And we'll also add a little bit of lightness back into the dark black that we put on the actual eyeball itself. And we can also fix this line a little bit here now. If it's a little bit out of shape or anything like that, you can see mine just pops out a little bit. I can shade it in. And in effect tone that down to the correct tone that I need for matching the reference. Alternatively, again you can use your shields, print shields and such. Now that one's not going to be very nice to me. So I'll just do it by hand. I'm not spraying into the white and I'm not spraying into my shadow, I'm just spraying over this bottom area, and if I want to I can then introduce just some idea of lines in there going across the white. It might be a bit hard for you to see then, but there's just little white lines radiating through that. You can even put a couple of extra lines in there if I want to. I might do that with a little bit of a darker grey later. I'm going to soften the line underneath the iris there. Well, you can see I had a little bit of burst of paint come out. Started just blending it back up into that white just to help hide it a little bit. And again, it's something I can fix up later. I'm just going to soften that black line down just a fraction more with a little bit of light grey over the top of it. And then this area in here, I said earlier, it needs a little bit of light grey. Again, some highlights in there. I'm going to go up on the inside of the eyelid there a little bit at the top. And one other thing I was planning to do whilst in the eye area is I just wanted to introduce a little bit of light grey back into the actual iris. And building up like little squares in between the earlier black lines that I did. Again, I'm not worried if I cover that black area of the iris itself, because what we'll do is we'll come in later and reclean that back up with the stencil when we do our next black layer. So pretty much what I wanted to do on this side of the eye. I might just do a little bit of detail in there, just a few little lines, breaking up the black shadow just a fraction. And then a line in and around, just to start making sense of the cheek joining this area. And then just soften it down. A little bit of light grey over the whole lot. I'll come out a little bit on the camera there. Again, so you can start seeing what the effect of the work we just did. We're starting to obviously introduce a lot more detail in and around the areas that we need it. I'm pretty happy with what we've done at the moment. Again, it's something you can work on for literally hours upon hours upon hours, putting these early layers back in. I will come over and do the other side now, because there's a lot of detail going on in there. A little bit more stippling up in the forehead, a little bit more stippling up and around there, and also I might break this shadow up around the nose just a little bit more. Add a little bit more grey to my eyeball on the other side, and then I'll be ready to go again with my darker greys and blacks. I'm pretty much now going to repeat the process that we were doing on the other side earlier with those little lines or little details over on this side. I probably won't need to talk about it as much because we're replicating a very similar process, and hopefully if you are having an attempt at these videos, you're probably at the stage where what I'm doing is making sense. You can probably start seeing it in your own picture that this is creating that underlay for all our detail, or bringing through more of our underlayer. And I'm going to start using my thumb, cutting some dots, and around this area also put in a few little highlights and stippling in and around his cheek there. So I won't talk too much about it during this next little bit of a process. Just get a good camera angle there for you, hopefully, so you can see it, and we'll see if we can get it done a little bit quicker so we can start getting onto some different layers. turn the pressure up just a fraction. It's running around about 30 at the moment. Go up to about 30, 36, 38. Not doing these lines too intense, probably around about 50% of that glaze colour. Don't want it standing out too much. And if it does stand out a bit, I'm just going to slide back a bit. There's a couple of lines here I can introduce as well. And then I'm going to cut them down into that shadow there a little bit. And also up from that area a fraction. And then down and out. Same kind of stroke. Now I'm just going to work a bit of stippling into the lighter area of that area of dark grey work. Not too far into the black. I'm going to allow a little bit of that darker grey to come through. If you go too far into the black, you'll find it'll start colour shifting it. I'm going to turn the canvas over for a second because I want to do a little bit of detail work up and around here. One thing I'll suggest to most people is if you are going to rotate your canvas, don't be afraid to rotate the actual reference as well. Just so you can actually truly see what's going on and you're actually not having to look at something that isn't really the same. I haven't turned my reference over. And just using my fingers to put in a few details. Also a little bit through here. Just stippling. Sounds like my whole farm's going up at the moment. I have to apologise here, I might have a little bit of background noise coming through. It's raining at the moment, and as you know I am painting outside, so thankfully I'm undercover. So I'm just going to continue. Again, I don't need to mention too much through this section, but this shadow needs to be knocked down a little bit just to help match the other side here. And just going to introduce a little bit of stippling up into this corner, just leaving a little bit of a darker shadow taking through. I'll finish off the light grey here, blend a little bit of this light grey in here, maybe put a little bit into the pupil as well, a little bit up into the forehead, and then I'm pretty much finished with my light grey again. So 2 centimetres away, bring some dots into that corner. And you can see it's just left that little bit of a dark line there for me. Break this shadow up a bit more with some lines. Soften it a little bit. You can see if I just bring the light grey back over, just port that shadow back to suit the contrast that we have on the other side. And then stippling. Just into the dust just a little bit. Soften down that corner a bit. And the other, about 3 centimetres away, just shooting a little bit of that light grey back in around the bottom area here. Again, as we did on the other side, I can clean up this bottom line a little bit. You can see it's just taken a little bit of the intensity away from that line. Now I'm going to break up the shadow a little bit on the forehead. And whilst I'm there, I'm going to do some very fine brush strokes. Again, a bit of a dot and stippling action from a bit more distance, 4 to 5 centimetres away. There's not a lot. You should be able to see in the monitor there, just adding that little bit of light grey in has done to the shadow. And now, as I mentioned before, we'll do some white or lighter grey highlight strokes. I'm trying to move around pretty quickly. I don't want anything going in there that's really going to be dominant. Now let's come back a little bit. And just put a few larger ones in over the top. And that'll help soften down that. You won't lose the actual detail in the ones you just did a little bit earlier. What I'm going to do whilst I'm over on this side is I'm just going to work a little bit of detail into this highlighted area. I'm going to shield off this. It doesn't matter if a bit of overspray goes into it because we can again cover it up a bit later, but I want a little bit of a brighter edge there. Stippling back into that darker area again. And bring that grey up a little bit and blend it off. Blending it into the hairline there a little bit. You can see it hasn't quite detailed it yet right at the moment, but then I can kind of come back in here with a bit of dark. I can cut that in a little bit more suitably. Whilst I'm up in the forehead area there, I'll just do a little bit more light grey stippling into the darker areas, especially over here, maybe a little bit up on the top of the forehead there. Again, I won't worry too much about these areas because it's not too much of a feature, and I'm just going to blend it a little bit into those white areas, into the wider highlight there. Also going to whack a little bit of light grey over my shadow work up there, over my wrinkles, and I'm going to might introduce a fair bit back in up here. Spraying that from around about 4 to 5 centimetres away at a bit of an angle so the overspray goes into those darker areas again. You can see it stands out a little bit here, so I'm just going to block a little bit of that white away. You can also introduce some lighter wrinkles. You'll find these lighter ones won't stand out too much because of the contrast. There's not a lot of contrast difference, but you will see once we get the black over later. Just to finalise a little bit of work with the light grey, I'm just going to cut this shadow back a little bit with a little bit more spaghetti type action and a little bit of light grey through this shadow, and maybe just introduce a little bit just on the inside of the cheek here. I want this to be reasonably detailed. And then I'll just softly blend it into the black a bit. And down here, quite close, quite detailed, but let a little bit of that black still show through. And now I'm just going to blend and soften it into that white area a little bit by pulling back about a centimetre or so and doing those knitting or sewing machine type dot actions. Blend this area in a little bit as well. I think it'll be a bit large on the dots here. You can see it's started overspraying a little bit into the nostril area, but that's not a problem because our next layer is the black, and that's when we pull the whole portrait together.